Hi, my name is Laura Rivas, and I'm happy to be here today presenting to your class on how to work with on working with linguistically diverse families and communities from the perspective of family engagement and equity. So my role at Berkeley Unified School District is as a site coordinator at two elementary schools um, doing family engagement and equity, which I'm sure you're all familiar with this new buzzword in the education field, where before some schools may have had parent liaisons, now we're placing this specific emphasis on engagement of families. And I think the reason is because we're realizing, and the data says it all, right, that when you really have a strategy and an intentional um, targeted strategy to reach out to families, and you're able to engage those families in the school community, the outcomes for students are very, very positive. In particular for our target populations, which are African American, Latino students, English language learners, and all of the students that are struggling in our educational field. I just want to say that I see my primary role as a family engagement coordinator to be building relationships and restoring trust in many instances. So I am sure you all know it sounds easy, but building relationships is not. It's not a piece of cake all the time. It can take work. Um, it takes a lot of patience, consistency, persistence, and oftentimes even a leap of faith that we're doing the right thing and that we're trying everything we can to make sure that all families feel welcome and that they know that we care about them and their children. So building relationships, I'm going to touch on this theme throughout my presentation because I think it's really the cornerstone of the work that I do and what really makes a difference in engaging families. So I want to touch upon, so in order to do that, right, in order to build relationships, we need to know where people are coming from, right? So I want you to think about how how you make friends or how you met your partner. How do we build relationships with people in our lives? And I think this is a different kind of relationship because we're talking about as school administrators, school staff, and families. We already enter into this relationship from a certain uh, position of power and influence and access, and there's a difference in all of those things between school staff and families. So given that, I think it's important to look at what are some of the challenges and what are the inequities that are faced by linguistically diverse families in particular, but really I think all the families that I will be talking about are the ones that I work with. And I think number one is access. And access, by access, I mean, access to have the children having access to the great curriculum that the schools may be teaching, that the teachers may be presenting, access to the material because it's in a language that they may not understand or presented in a way that's not friendly to them or that doesn't feel like that where they don't feel they connect or they have a connection or even a point of entry to begin to have a relationship to the material. Access to the staff and administration. I work in a school where we have a very broad mix of demographics, so I see the difference when more affluent or middle class white families come on campus and they want to have a check-in. They want to have a check-in with the teacher or have a conversation with the principal and just kind of strike up a casual conversation. It's feels very casual and seamless and effortless to them. And I think it has to do with the cultural capital that they already have. So if we have a white principal and it's a white affluent family, I think they see the principal as their colleague and kind of as their equal, and they're also treated that way. Whereas with our immigrant families, and you add to that if they come from a socially disadvantaged economic status, then they are that much more hesitant or that much more uncomfortable and feel that much more removed from being able to approach a principal in such a casual way, have just a whole different perspective of, and they're also treated differently by, I mean, in the sense that they are, yeah, I see it all the time. They are asked to make an appointment or they are asked to come back at a different time. And I think that has a lot to do with our perceptions of our families. So I think that sometimes there's fear. There's a fear that I don't know, I don't understand these families. I don't know what they want. I don't know what they need. I'm not sure what they're asking me. All of these questions that I see administrators asking themselves day to day in my position. And oftentimes what I do is a lot of translating back and forth to just to help build those bridges and make those connections between what the families are concerned about and asking, and in a way that administrators and school staff can understand. And that's not always easy. And I think I really believe that having someone at your school site that specializes in family engagement is very important, because we need school staff that are trained on how to do this, and it needs to be from a community organizing perspective or standpoint, because really all the skills that I bring to this position, I feel are rooted in community organizing, and all that is relationship building, right? So if we want to bring folks together, if we want to engage families, we have to listen to them. We have to create spaces where they can feel that they're contributing. All of these things are key. So another one of the challenges I wanted to touch upon are, which I think I already started to, are social conditions that our families face. Particularly, I'm talking about immigrant families or families from low socioeconomic backgrounds. They're facing social conditions that are a reality in our region, in our state, and in our country, which we often, don't. If your upbringing, if you were fortunate enough to have an upbringing where you didn't have to worry about finance or having a roof over your head, having both parents in the home, owning a home, all of those things, if you had the fortune of having that experience, I think it can be really difficult to understand what it feels like to experience poverty, to experience instability, financial instability, and to understand what these children and families are experiencing. I think it can be really difficult, so it takes that much more effort and sensitivity, I think, and awareness about what that's like, what that experience is like for these families, and all the barriers that creates for them. Immigration status, restricting access to support services and resources in the community. We have a lot of families that haven't been able to adjust their status. So we see that, it's at school. I see that all the time. It's at school that they're able to get access to health referrals or, vision and dental screening and checks for their kids, or even for themselves, counseling and all sorts of different support. So we have a whole we have a lot of need in our families, and in the communities that they live in, there aren't, I think, because of all the cutbacks at the state level and federal, a lot of these resources have disappeared or have shrunk. And so now we have a lot of families are depending on schools for this support. And so it's important for teachers and school administrators to understand that that's where we are as a community. We have to start with looking at where we're at and working with that. And so that brings me to another one of the challenges, is that we're seeing very disparate and inequitable educational outcomes for our children. And that is absolutely unacceptable to me. And we talk a lot about the achievement gap, about the opportunity gap. We call it all sorts of different things. But basically, nationally, we're seeing that our families, our children are falling behind. are falling through the cracks, and it's not because they're not capable. It's something in the system is not working for them. And I think that we can't afford to passively sit by and keep doing what we're doing without really looking at ourselves and asking if are we really doing everything that we can to reach these families? Are we really providing an education, an equal opportunity for education for all children, regardless of where they come from, regardless of what language they speak, regardless of how much we know or don't know about them and their families? We have an obligation to provide an education to these children, and to provide access to them. So what does this data tell us? What is the story that this tells us? And I think that's a good question to ask ourselves, especially those of you that are pursuing your degree in education as a doctor and will be and are already leaders in this field. And so I think it's important to model that as leaders, to really model what it is to be inquisitive and self-reflective for our children and for our families, and to be lifelong learners. And these are the hard questions that I think we can't avoid to ask. We have to face them head on, and it's one step at a time that we will begin to resolve this problem. And then the other issue I wanted to just touch upon briefly in terms of challenges that I see is that there's a big cultural mismatch between teaching staff and administrators and children. So we have in particularly urban areas where I've worked, I've seen that there's still quite a majority of teachers and staff at the schools that are white, European American, and tend to be middle class, and the families, the demographic of the children and the families are tend to be majority students of color, many immigrant families from all over the world, and tend to be on the lower end of the economic strata. So we have this cultural mismatch between students and teachers and staff, and so there tends to be this distance, and it varies. I've seen that it really varies teacher to teacher, classroom to classroom, and even school to school, on how this distance is bridged between the experience of the teacher and the experience of their students. I've seen some really great examples of that, of teachers creating spaces for the family to be in the classroom, inviting the children to bring pictures of their families and posting them around the room so they see themselves reflected. So even though they may not see themselves reflected in the people that they're learning from, that they see themselves reflected in the photos of their families that are posted in the classroom. And that feels genuine and authentic to me, as opposed to just having a poster of Cesar Chavez or Martin Luther King and kind of the more traditional figures that we tend to hold up, which are important. I believe they're great, but that can't be where we stop, providing access. And so that's all I wanted to say about the inequities and challenges for now. I want to move into what are some things we can do. What are some strategies? I know we love that word, but I think it's important to talk about what are the things we can do. And I want to share a couple of examples of things that I've seen work really well in terms of engaging families, of linguistically diverse families. So I want to share just a few thoughts first. One, I want to say that one of my mentors that I love, her name is Pamela Harrison Small at Berkeley Unified. She always says that knowing is a strategy. So I never really understood that until recently. Why is she saying knowing is a strategy? Just knowing, And I think what she means is that knowing our students, knowing our families, that is a strategy for building those bridges and creating a strong connection. And creating a strong connection is the bridge that you need to build in order for our students to be able to learn. Because I read a quote somewhere that I love. It says, children don't care what you know until they know that you care. And so if we just start there, I think that's where it's important to have information about the family's cultures and values, what's important to them, what do they care about, what do they worry about, what are they concerned about, and what is it that they need, and that this information comes from the families themselves and not from our assumptions about them or what we think they need or what we think they value, based on maybe something that was said. Or, I think these are important questions to ask in an open forum type space where families can speak for themselves. Because I think it's really important to create those opportunities where families can speak for themselves. The second strategy, I think, is treating parents as partners. So we hear, this is another big buzzword in education these days, is partnerships, So how do we build these partnerships? I think a place to start is looking at how we are seeing our families. How do we see them? Do we see them as assets, or do we see them as adversaries? Are we, really inviting them to the school sites? Are we really creating opportunities for leadership for them? Are we really treating them as true partners in education? Do we really see them as a key piece in the puzzle on how to educate the whole child? And I think that sometimes there's a good intention is there, but in practice, there aren't as many opportunities as I feel should be to have parents really come and have a voice in their child's educational experience. Because I think when you are really successful at doing that, I could see that you really have the power of creating strong advocates in the child's education, and not just for their own child, but for all the children in that school and in the classroom. So it's really great. One kind of example I wanted to mention that I've seen, not in my school sites, I'm still working on that, but the Harvard Family Research Project has a whole web page online. You can look it up, Harvard Family Research Project, and they've laid out this whole approach to parent-teacher conferences, which they call the Academic Parent-Teacher Teams, APPT. And there's this whole way of they lay it all out, there's a whole guide for it, but basically it's changing the approach to parent-teacher conferences from individualized conferences to having the classroom meet as a team and analyze the data of the students as a team. So it would be the teacher, it would prepare a chart or some kind of visual to share with the families so that they can see where their children are at in relation to each other in math and literacy, let's say. And then they look at the data and analyze it together. How powerful would that be to really sit our families at the same table and look at data together? We do it as educators, but I think we don't often enough share that data with families so that they really are truly informed and understand where their children are in relation to where they need to be and in relation to their peers. And I think that's really a great way, a great example of how to treat parents as partners. The third strategy I want to share is that it's important to create welcoming schools and welcoming and inviting school climate for all families. So again, how do you do this when you have monolingual staff at a school and your family speak different languages? Well, there's lots of different ways. You can do signage around the school that reflects those different languages. So maybe we don't have staff or teachers that speak those languages. For example, in Berkeley, we have families that speak Farsi, that speak Arabic, that speak Urdu, that speak Amharic, and we don't have staff at many of our schools that speak these languages, but we have signage. We have signage around in those languages, say welcome, office this way. There's lots of different things you can do, but I think starting with that, just having welcome sign in different languages could be a nice touch. And it's always really powerful to be able to greet families. I think especially for principals, it really goes a long way if you're able to come out, walk around, and greet the families by name. If you can learn if you can learn their names, if you can try to pronounce them correctly, and I think that's a great way to start building that relationship is, ask them, so how can you help me pronounce your name? And I think it really shows that you care, that you see them for who they are, and that you're making an effort to build a relationship. So those are just very simple things that I think can go a really long way. And lastly, I want to say that I want to share one more example of something that, excuse me, that was really successful at one of my school sites. We organized, it was a very collaborative effort, but we organized a science night for the kids. And the idea for this came out of trying to engage families to talk about how do we build a positive school culture at this particular school. Because there had been a lot of parent complaints, and the principal was getting a lot of negative feedback, and there were complaints about the principal at the district office. It was just, it felt kind of like we really needed to talk about what it meant to build a positive school culture, but we knew that just inviting families to a workshop on building positive school culture was not going to be enough, so we had to grab them in some way. And we got together and realized, I invited a couple of key parents to help me think through this, and we realized, if we organize and plan an event that that gets the kids really excited, and and that the parents feel would really benefit their children academically, they will come to the workshop. So we created this event called Science Night. We got, flyers out to all the classrooms. We got the teachers talking to the students about it. The students were very excited. We collaborated with a local community organization that had a bunch of volunteers that just came and brought all these hands-on, they brought microscopes, they brought circuitry building, they brought all these materials to build rockets, and they brought slime and all these different science hands-on things for kids. And we just pumped it up, and every single classroom got the kids really excited. We also partnered with the after-school program. After-school program is key in reaching families. If you have an after-school care program at your site, they're a wonderful asset to in terms of strengthening your relationship with families. You probably already know that, but that they have been key for me. And believe it or not, we had a packed house. The kids loved the Science Night event. They had a wonderful time. They each had a little badge that said scientist for the day, and they were carrying around their little passport book and got stamps at every little station that they went to, and at the end they got a prize. The parents were engaged in this workshop. We did a multilingual workshop with this, headsets, and we had small groups of parents. We gave them questions, and every single group came up to the front to present, to share for 3 minutes about what they talked about at their table. It was a great opportunity for them to build some of those leadership skills. Some parents were really shy to come up and speak in front of a group of people, but I find that they really had a wonderful time just sharing some of their concerns. So we had them basically share what are some of the things they loved about the school and what are some of the things they'd like to change about the school. So we were really happy to see that what they loved about the school were the teachers, how dedicated the teaching staff was. They loved the new playground that we have. They loved, really they talked about the teachers nonstop. They loved the teachers. What they wanted to change, however, were some of the more systemic things, like on that administration side, communications. Some families felt communications was all over the place. It wasn't consistent. It wasn't always in the language that they understood. Some pretty key things they shared that have helped us to this day to figure out how to really continue to build these relationships and work with families. So just as an example, I think when you work together in collaboration and you put something, you organize an event that benefits children and invite the families and make it accessible to them. It was in the evening. We provided dinner, and we provided dinner. Basically, we didn't provide childcare because most of the kids were in the auditorium. So it was a very successful event. And so I just want to share some closing thoughts. I talked about working with diverse families in your region, and I think just to kind of close on a self-reflection. So what does it really take what does it mean and what does it take to be engaged in social justice leadership? I think you all know that it's not easy work, but you're here for a reason, and I think it takes a lot of hard work, and it takes not just good intentions. I think we can't stop with good intentions. We need to have a strategy. And I think, like I said before, A lot of districts have begun to invest more in this family engagement approach because they see that it's important, and I think it is really key. And if you can find some way to incorporate or to including your budget, having a specialist at each school site that focuses on engaging families that can support both staff and families. So just to touch quickly on the model that we use in our Office of Family Engagement and Equity at Berkeley Unified School District is this called the dual capacity model. So basically it comes out of Dr. Karen Mapps from Harvard. And basically what it says is that we need to build dual capacity, means building both the capacity of school staff and administrators to engage with families and building the capacity of families to be engaged at their child's school and education. So we have to be able to do both, and I think that it's really hard to do that if you don't have at least one person at your school site or at least in the district dedicated to helping teachers and administrators figure out how to do this work. So thinking like a community organizer and listening to the families of your students, I think is key. I mentioned this before, but really listening, really creating opportunities where families can talk and school administrators and teachers can just listen. Listen to their stories, listen to their concerns, listen without judgment, listen without responding immediately, but just really listen and take it all in and have that really help inform your approach, to really educating the full child. I think creating those spaces where families can share their not only their challenges but also their triumphs. What are some of the things they've accomplished? So that, what are they proud of? What are their hopes and their dreams for their children? I think that's really important. So I think I am done, and I think my time is up. Thank you very much for listening.